verse 13 of Exodus 18. And it came about the next day that Moses sat to judge the people, and the people stood about Moses from morning until the evening. Now when Moses' father-in-law saw that all he was doing for the people, he said, "What is this thing that you are doing for the people? Why do you alone sit as judge, and all the people stand about you from morning until evening?" And Moses said to his father-in-law, "Because the people come to me to inquire of God. When they have a dispute, it comes to me, and I judge between a man and his neighbor, and make known the statutes of God and his laws." And Moses' father-in-law said to him, "The thing that you're doing is not good. You will surely wear out both yourself and these people who are with you, for the task is too heavy for you. You cannot do it alone. Now listen to me. I shall give you counsel, and God be with you. You be the people's representative before God, and you bring the disputes to God. Then teach them the statutes and the laws, and make known to them the way in which they are to walk and the work that they are to do. Furthermore, you shall select out of all the people able men who fear God, men of truth, those who hate dishonest gain, and you shall place these over them as leaders of thousands, of hundreds, of fifties, and of tens. And let them judge the people at all times, and let it be that every major dispute they will bring to you, but every minor dispute they themselves will judge. So it will be easier for you, and they will bear the burden with you. If you do this thing, and God so commands you, then you will be able to endure, and all these people will go to their place in peace." So Moses listened to his father-in-law and did all that he had said. And Moses chose able men out of Israel and made them heads over the people, leaders of thousands, of hundreds, of fifties, and of tens. And they judged the people at all times. The difficult dispute they would bring to Moses, but every minor dispute they themselves would judge. Then Moses bade his father-in-law farewell, and he went away into his own land. With our congregation here at Chelsea, trying to go through the process of appointing leadership, of trying to appoint elders and deacons, when I read this passage, I just thought this would be good for us to consider at this time, because I believe that the very principles that are taught in these verses are something that apply to the New Testament body as well. This isn't going to be a deep lesson, be a pretty short lesson, in fact. It's not anything earth-shattering. I thought it would, at times it's good to look back at the history of God's people and just see what we can glean from it and see how it can help us. And I want to look at just 3 quick points this morning. The first thing that I see when I look at these verses is that if you have lived more years than most people, and you've accumulated more wisdom than most and more experience than most, then be willing and bold in sharing that. Be willing and bold to share that with even leaders. I'm sure in this particular situation with Jethro, the father-in-law, being the father-in-law of Moses, it was easy for him to sit down and give his son-in-law advice, being a family member. But even looking at it that way, Moses was the leader of a nation. He was the leader of Israel. He was the leader of God's people, and God spoke to him directly. He communicated with God. And so, we could maybe look at it from a standpoint of where it may have been difficult for Jethro to approach him in that way, but he still saw a situation that wasn't good. And he saw that Moses needed help and the Israelites needed help, and he was willing to give his advice. It didn't stop him. He didn't let Moses' position stop him from offering what he thought was sound advice or sound wisdom. He said, "What is this thing you're doing? Why are you doing this by yourself? The people line up and they wait all day." He said, that's not good. It's not good for you. It's not good for the people. And he said, "Now listen to me, and I'll give you counsel." But notice he says, "And God be with you." He didn't come arrogantly as if to say, "Now listen to me, son. You got it all wrong, and I'm going to tell you how to fix it." He came to him in a way that was humble and showed his love and concern. He not only said, "And God be with you," but if we look in verse 23, he says, if you do this thing, if you choose to follow this advice, and God so commands you, then you will be able to endure. So Jethro's advice was given in a spirit of love and humility, and there was even this expectation that he would take his wisdom and consider it and verify it with God. If God so commands you, if this is right in God's sight, then this is what you need to do. I think about another example, just because it's fresh in our mind. We've been studying in the Shaping Hearts curriculum with all the children all the way up to high school. We've been studying Genesis. And we've been talking about the story of Joseph here recently. And it's very kind of parallel to this because Joseph was asked to come before the Pharaoh, the king of Egypt. He had had these dreams and he didn't understand them. He didn't know what they meant. And he called all the wise men and magicians of Egypt together, and they couldn't explain it either. But they found out through the cupbearer who had forgotten about him that Joseph could. And so they bring Joseph before the Pharaoh of Egypt. And I don't know about you, but I think if I was standing before the leader of a nation, I would pretty much just do what he asked me. I mean, can you interpret these dreams? Well, and Joseph very humbly said, it's not in me, but God will do it for you. And I think I probably would just stop right there. Let me just answer your question and be done with it. But Joseph didn't stop there. He interpreted the dreams, and he goes on to say, and here's what you need to do. He saw the dire need that this famine that was going to occur, this 7 years of abundance, and then 7 years of famine, and the famine would completely consume the 7 years of abundance. He saw the dire situation. And he saw that he could help Pharaoh, and he was not only concerned about Pharaoh, but the people of Egypt and the surrounding people. It was going to involve his family as well. And so when he finished the interpretation, he said, and here's what you need to do. You need to take a fifth of all the produce that we get in the 7 years of abundance, keep it in certain cities, keep it under protection. He goes into detail about what he needs to do. And so, again, our first point is that if you have the words of God, if you have the wisdom of God, be willing and giving and bold in sharing that wisdom, especially to leaders. The second point, leaders have an obligation to recognize and humbly heed good godly wisdom, don't they? How did Jethro react to? How did Moses react to Jethro, his father-in-law's advice? In our day and time, we could probably expect him to very much in pride say, well, I'm the leader of Israel. God talks to me, and why are you giving me advice? I speak directly to God. But verse 24 of Exodus 18, as we read, it says, so Moses listened to his father-in-law and did all that he said. He humbly recognized these words of wisdom, and he heeded this advice. And I'm assuming, since Jethro said, and if God so commands you, I'm assuming that Moses probably took it to God and said, is this good advice? Is this what I need to do? And he was obedient to that. Pharaoh did the same thing. In the other example we looked at, when he heard this wisdom of Joseph, he said, well, I don't know anybody else that there's a divine spirit in, and if you talk directly with God, then maybe you need to be in charge. And he put Joseph in charge of everything, really the land of Egypt. And he said, only in the throne I'll be greater than you. You handle it. And so in Pharaoh's humility and wisdom, he recognized that these were words of God. He said, if God talks to you, then that's what we need to go by. So in both cases, they recognized this wisdom as being wisdom from God and heeded it. Now, those are two examples of how it should work. Again, as I said before, we live in a world and a country where we can look into the world of politics every day and see examples of how people don't follow this model. I was talking with Chris Wortham, I think it was last Sunday, and he said something that really hit the nail on the head. We were talking a little bit about politics, and he said, in days past, a person's beliefs, where they stood morally and where their convictions were, that determined what party they belonged to. He said, but now with most people, it's what party they belong to determines their beliefs. Isn't that the way you see it? That we have a belief on one side, and well, that's just what I got to believe because I belong to that party. So we let the party shape our our beliefs for us. And we see when that happens, when people take a side and accept a set viewpoint from a set group of people, and not verify it as being general wisdom or wisdom from God, wisdom from a higher authority, then there can never really be a solution to the situation or the problem. And I thought it would be good for us to look at an example of that actually taking place. If we'll turn to 1 Kings chapter 12. We have the story of Rehoboam. Rehoboam was Solomon's son, and he was getting ready to take over the kingdom from his father Solomon because he had passed. 1 Kings chapter 12, let's read a few verses here starting in verse 1. It says, then Rehoboam went to Shechem, for all Israel had come to Shechem to make him king. Excuse me. Now it came about when Jeroboam the son of Nebat heard of it, he was living in Egypt, for he was yet in Egypt where he had fled from the presence of King Solomon. Then they sent and called him, and Jeroboam and all the assembly of Israel came and spoke to Rehoboam, saying, Your father, he made our yoke hard. Now therefore lighten the hard service of your father and his heavy yoke which he put on us, and we will serve you. Then he said, Well, depart from me for 3 days, then return to me. So the people departed. And King Rehoboam consulted with the elders who had served his father Solomon while he was still alive, saying, How do you counsel me to answer this people? Then they spoke to him, saying, If you will be a servant to this people today and will serve them, grant them their petition and speak good words to them, then they will be your servants forever. But he forsook the counsel of the elders which they had given him and consulted with the young men who grew up with him and served him. So he said to them, What counsel do you give me, that we may answer this people who have spoken to me, saying, Lighten the yoke which our father put on us? And the young men who grew up with him spoke to him, saying, Thus you shall say to the people who spoke to you, saying, Your father who made our yoke heavy, now you make it lighter for us. But you shall speak to them, My little finger is thicker than my father's loins. Whereas my father loaded you with a heavy yoke, I will add to your yoke. My father disciplined you with whips, but I will discipline you with scorpions. Then Jeroboam and all the people came to Rehoboam on the 3rd day, as the king had directed, saying, Return to me on the 3rd day. And the king answered the people harshly, for he forsook the advice of the elders which they had given him. And he spoke to them according to the advice of the young men. And so going down to verse 15, the king did not listen to the people. When you look at this, you ask the question, what did Rehoboam do right? What did he do wrong? I think the answer is obvious. He made a good decision in going to the elders who had served with his father and advised Solomon on things. And that's about where it stops. Instead of doing like Moses and Pharaoh and recognizing that wisdom as wisdom from God, or verifying that wisdom as being from God, he instead takes that advice and he verifies it with his younger friends that he grew up with. And he let that set group of people determine his decision. And this led, as we read on in the story, to 10 of the tribes of the kingdom being taken away. He was only left with Judah and Benjamin, and that was through a promise given to David. But again, leaders have an obligation to recognize humbly and humbly heed good advice that's given to them. The wise have an obligation to share that wisdom. The last point I want to look at this morning is that really and we see this in Exodus 18:20, what we read early, is that everyone has a responsibility to grow closer to God and His wisdom. In Exodus 18:20, when Jethro was giving that advice to Moses, he says, Then teach them the statutes and the laws. Make known to them the way in which they are to walk and the work that they are to do. He's in a nutshell saying, if you can teach the people, how they are to treat their brothers and sisters, if you can teach them how to grow closer to God's law and His ways and how He would have you act and how He would have you work and behave, then maybe there's not such a need for that line that they wait in all day, so long for judgment. Maybe they can take care of that themselves. Maybe that line will be a little shorter. There's always going to be those problems that they come to you, but really it's the people's responsibility to grow in wisdom of God. We see that when we look at 1 Corinthians and verses that talk about the body. I wanted to read another verse in 1 Corinthians chapter 12. And this will pretty much sum up or conclude the lesson. But in 1 Corinthians chapter 12, we're told about how the body of Christ works together and how the members are all very important. 1 Corinthians 12:12, it says, For even as the body is one, and yet has many members, and all the members of the body, though they are many, are one body, so also is Christ. For by one Spirit we were all baptized into one body, whether Jews or Greeks, whether slaves or free, and we were all made to drink of one Spirit. For the body is not one member, but many. And if the foot should say, Because I'm not a hand, am I not a part of the body? It is not for this reason any less a part of the body. And if the ear should say, Because I'm not an eye, am I not a part of the body? It is not for this reason any less a part of the body. If the whole body were an eye, where would the hearing be? If the whole were hearing, where would the sense of smell be? But now God has placed the members, each one of them, in the body, just as He has desired. And if they were all one member, where would the body be? But now there are many members, but one body. He goes on and he continues to explain that how important each member is. We sometimes deem certain members of our body less honorable, he says, and we've all done that. We don't recognize how much we use a little pinky or something like that until you smash it with a hammer like I did not long ago. And then you realize how important it is, how much you use it. And so the point of this passage is that everyone has a role and everyone has a responsibility. No matter how more important or less important we think that is, they're all equally important to the body moving forward efficiently and effectively and growing. And I think it only stands to reason that it makes sense to me that if we're all members of one body and the wise are sharing their wisdom, if the leaders are recognizing that wisdom and heeding godly wisdom, and if we're all teaching wisdom and people are doing their best to grow wiser and closer to God, then the whole body benefits, doesn't it? God has taught us a lot of things through the nation of Israel. I think one of the things He taught us was that He took us a physical nation, and He always kept a remnant of that nation to Him, didn't He? He always kept a remnant of Israel intact. And He taught us, showing us that He would have a spiritual kingdom, and it would never be destroyed. It wouldn't matter if you were a Jew or Greek, as we just read, a Grecian. Whatever nationality you were, you could be part of a nation where Christ, the Son of God, is reigning as your king, and you can live eternally. Whatever nationality we are here on this earth, we know that there's a finality to that, because when our physical body dies, we're no longer a citizen of that nation anymore. But we can continue on in a kingdom where we can be a citizen eternally. And if you're not a part of that kingdom this morning, if you're not a part of that body that strives together to work together and to help each other and to grow closer to God so that we can all be that nation of people together in God's kingdom eternally, you have that opportunity this morning to place that citizenship. If you've reached a point in your life where you believe that Christ is the Son of God and that God sent Him to this earth and He died on the cross as a payment for your sin. He did that to pay the debt for what you owed. You owed death as a result of your sin. But if you believe that Christ was the payment for that, and you're willing to confess that before men, and you're willing to die with Christ, to be crucified with Christ in baptism, to put on Christ and to clothe yourself with Christ and to be added to His kingdom, you have that opportunity right now while we stand and sing.